Hey everyone, welcome into another episode of Investing in Real Estate. I am Clayton Morris. Thank you so much for downloading this podcast and pushing it up to the front page of iTunes this past week. Thank you to Apple for featuring us as one of the top podcasts in iTunes. I'm flattered by that and flattered by all of the downloads as well and great feedback. This is the show where we're devoted to buy and hold real estate and creating passive income, creating legacy wealth for you and your family. So I love rental real estate. That's the main 100% focus of this show. And one of the questions I get all the time from new investors that we work with and talk with is, okay, well, after I've used up some of my own money, how in the world do I get private money? Is there a way to get private money? I'm so scared to do it. I don't know how to do it. Well, finally, I am just beyond thrilled because many of you know I bring up her name all the time when I'm talking with you on the phone, in just casual conversations. I refer to this incredible woman all the time. Her name is Susan Lassiter-Lyons, and she is an investor, an entrepreneur, an author, and a coach. She's the author of Getting the Money, a book that my wife and I read, literally changed everything for us. And then we went through her amazing course, which I'm telling you, we're going to have links to all of this in the show notes page. So don't you worry if you are driving right now, the Getting the Money course, teaching you how to access private capital to take your investing business to the next level. She has done over $800 million. $800 million in deals. And her goal is to get to $1 billion of private equity for her students and for investors around the world by 2020. That is a tall goal, and I am excited to have Susan Lassiter-Lyons on the show today. Susan, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Clayton. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, it's a true pleasure and a real honor to have you here on the show. Literally, we have structured, we've had a couple of key guests here in the past, Tom Wheelwright being one of them from the tax side of things, has really changed the way that we've managed our taxes for our business. Mike Michalowicz for his profit first system and how we've been able to really build the profit into our business. But your leveraging of private money and the strategies to acquire private money have also changed our business to a dramatic effect. And I'm just really thrilled to share your strategies with our audience today. So let's dive right into it. How in the world did you get started in real estate investing?
Real estate investing. It was back in 1994. When I was 9 years old, for those of you that are doing the math. Just kidding. I was a little older than that, but I was working in corporate America. I was working for Hertz Rent-A-Car at the time, and I had been in the rental car industry for several years by that time. I started when I was 19 years old in that business. And I worked my way up the corporate ladder at Hertz and found myself at the corporate headquarters where I was a national sales trainer. So my job was to travel all around North America, go to a different destination city every week and, teach sales to the counter staff and the trainers at that location. So really what that meant, it sounds kind of glamorous on the surface, but really what it meant was that I was on the road 3 weeks every month. On Sunday afternoon, I'd fly to some destination city in North America, stay all week by myself in a hotel room, and then come home on a Friday night and turn around and do it all over again on Sunday afternoon. And so I spent a lot of late nights in hotel rooms watching TV. And one night I saw Carlton Sheets on a TV. It was a late night infomercial, some random city I was in. And, his whole no money down real estate pitch really intrigued me. So I ordered the system, studied it, and started implementing it. And, that's really how I got my start. It was all the way back in 1994, trying to do some no money down strategies to acquire properties that would cash flow.
That's amazing. And so I mentioned in the intro that you've tabulated it recently where it basically, the sum is about $800 million in deals. You have, at one point, even going through your private money course, Getting the Money, you talk about having owned 500 units. Is that the same, or has that gone up to about 800 units now?
Oh, it's gone up now. Yeah. It's my goal to usually add anywhere from like 100 to 200 units a year to my personal portfolio. And, depending on what's happening with exit strategies of some of the syndicates that I'm in, I do a lot of commercial investing. So I'm mostly invested in multifamily properties, which are apartment buildings all across the country. And I participate in, we call them syndications, but it's really just a fancy word for investing with a group of other investors in these deals.
That's amazing. So take us through your philosophy on private money. Do you encourage people to want to use some of their own money at the start? Does that matter? And if you have, and now you want to transition into private money, what is your sort of philosophy on acquiring private money, just at a high level? And then we'll dive into some nitty gritty here in a moment.
Well, I'll tell you my overarching philosophy with regard to private money is, and I say this all the time, all roads lead to private money. That is it's my mission, right? I think that I'm forever going to be aligned with this topic. And, I've, in my $1 billion mission, that's going to be my legacy. So I am a true believer in private money. I think that when you're first starting out, people will tell you all sorts of crazy things. And I think that the less that you can listen to uninformed people, then the better off we're all going to be.
Right.
I personally don't think that it's a requirement, right, to start off investing your own capital into real estate. I think that it's absolutely appropriate, and totally cool to leverage other people's investment capital for 100% of your investment. If you put your own capital into the deal, that's awesome. You have some skin in the game. And I know lots of investors who love to see that, especially at an institutional level. But, for the process that I really talk about with regard to raising private money, I'm focusing mainly on that, for the entrepreneurs in the crowd who may be familiar with the regular stages of private capital. It goes from like the founder stage, right? Where you start a business and the two people who are running it or the one person who's running it puts their own money into it and you kind of bootstrap it. And then the next round of funding usually is that friends and family round. Some of the pros will call it friends, family, and fools. And I don't like to use that word fools. So I just call it the FFA round, which is friends, family, and acquaintances. And that's really where I focus on the individual investor as opposed to the institutional investor. So for the individual investor in that bucket, right, of your friends, your family, and your acquaintances, I have found over the course of, millions and millions of dollars raised in private capital that it's not necessary to have your own skin in the game, so to speak. So I think that's the first big fallacy. I also think that the second fallacy is, when people are trying to figure out like what their investment strategy is going to be, meaning like what exactly am I going to be investing in? Am I going to start with like single family homes, or am I going to go straight to commercial properties like apartment buildings or office investments or what have you, like I do? It's not necessary to start off in single family investing. It's absolutely possible for you to identify whatever strategy and asset class appeals to you and go for it right out of the gate.
Right. If there's something that you're comfortable with, that you love, and you want to dive into it, there's no reason you need to work up to it. Mm-hmm. You talk about those 3 buckets of opportunity for private financing, the FFA. How difficult is it I think maybe some people just feel like I spoke to one investor recently who said, my uncle was willing to lend me $200,000. Mm-hmm. That really is private money, right? We don't have to make it more complicated than that.
No. People love to complicate things. And I think that one of the reasons why I've been so successful in the training and coaching side of this business is that it's just inherent in my nature to simplify the complex. And honestly, the raising private capital or utilizing private capital or private equity for real estate investments can be as difficult as the attorney wants it to be.
Right.
Right. I.e., right. The longer they keep you on the phone, the more that they get to charge you to explain this to you. I like to just simplify it. And it is just that simple. Hey, Uncle Bill, $200,000. Cool.
Right. It's, and it doesn't have to be difficult the way you structure things. I think people make it difficult because there's a lot of fear. So before we kind of get into the nitty gritty of like to explain the difference between debt partners and equity partners and those sorts of pieces of this,
Sure.
I want to address that main piece because as you go through your course, by the way, Getting the Money is amazing because I think it takes you through many, many days of you on stage, really diving deep into how to do this step by step by step by step. And I can tell you, even just like watching the faces of the people in the audience in your course, you can see it's like some of that fear is like dripping off of people.
Right.
They're starting to confront that. That's the one thing that's holding people back. So how do you overcome that piece of it or sort of face that fear before you get into the private money?
This whole concept is either made or broken by your mindset. It really is. And I think not just this concept, but I think that success in general or, any kind of entrepreneurial endeavor, it's like you're usually the only thing that's holding you back. And the number one constraint in your business or starting your business usually is going to be you. Right. Mm-hmm. At least I have found that to be true. Clayton, you and Natalie, probably don't have any issues with that at all, but I certainly do. Mm-hmm. And I know that lots of my students struggle with that as well. In terms of the mindset piece of it and the fear piece of it, there are two things that I usually focus on. And the first thing is when people say that, they don't want to quote unquote, and I'm using air quotes right now, borrow money from anybody that they know. And I think it's just using that term borrow money that puts us into this weird physiological state, right? I remember back when I was in college and I got myself into a financial pinch and I had to borrow some money from my grandmother. And I can still tap into that feeling that I had. I mean, my palms were sweaty. I felt nauseous in my stomach. I felt, kind of just like a cold sweat and clammy. And I was nervous to ask her to borrow this money because it put me in a very uncomfortable position of neediness. And I didn't like that. When I work with real estate investors who are looking to raise capital for their investments, I tell them, you're not looking for a lender. You're not looking to borrow money. You're inviting someone that knows you, loves you, and trusts you to invest in an opportunity for them to make a return on their investment. So I think that, instead of referring to people in my business as private lenders, we refer to them as private money partners. And I think that just changing out that term from lender to partner really puts us on more of an equal playing field. And it doesn't automatically put us into that weird subservient, I have to borrow money from this person, therefore I am not as good as this person kind of mindset. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. I hope our audience is paying attention to that because that was a really important point. I know exactly what you're talking about. I grew up with this paradigm, right, from my dad. And I remember him telling me at a young age, this stuck with me and it didn't come out until you just brought it up. Thank you for this regression hypnosis therapy.
Sorry. Put a trigger warning on.
Yeah. No, he said, don't ever borrow money from friends. And that stuck with me, right? Because he basically had this idea, this paradigm that it would always cause problems, that somebody inevitably wouldn't be able to pay it back or something like that. And I grew up with these negative associations with money. I talk about it here on the show often. Money doesn't grow on trees. We're not the Rockefellers. We can't afford that. All of those things are in my brain. So I've had to fight against these memes my whole life. Whereas my wife, she grew up not having those memes in her brain. And so we've had this interesting marriage because where I have this fear of money, she's not had that fear. And we had to work on, I've had to really, really work on that over the years. But that palm sweaty fear of, fear of asking for money from somebody. But what you just said was so powerful. It's that flipping of that paradigm. You're not begging them like Oliver Twist, please, sir, may I have some more? No. You're flipping it around and you're inviting them to come into a deal, to something special that you've uncovered. And really it's going to benefit them.
Exactly. It absolutely is. There is an author that I like. His name is Orrin Claff. He has a really great book called Pitch Anything, and he's a professional capital raiser. So he's a hired gun for, startups and well-established companies who are looking to raise millions and millions of dollars and compensate somebody really well for it. And he has a great philosophy about this that I love. And he always says, with regard to money, that money is a commodity. You can get money anywhere, right? The thing that these people don't have is the ability to have their money earn money, right? You look at the volatility in the stock market right now. You look at the volatility in other types of investments right now. And honestly, real estate is, in my opinion, not only the safest investment, but it's also proven to be a major wealth builder over time. So when, people are kind of looking at you like, well, gee, what do you have to offer? It's like, well, I'm going to put it right back on you. The only thing you have to offer is money, right? I'm giving you the opportunity. And those are, in my eyes, not equal because money is everywhere. Deals aren't.
That's right. And I've been very fortunate in my life to be able to, that's what I do well, is find deals. The harder thing for me has been to get the money.
Right.
And so, that's what I'm really good at. I know where to find really good deals on properties. But it's like now I want to buy 10, I want to buy 20. How do I do that? How do I get this private money? Right. So, people first turn mentally to this idea of the traditional bank financing. I'm going to walk down, down to Bank of America, and I'm going to build a portfolio that way. Why, as you write in your book, why is traditional bank financing the worst way to build a portfolio?
I have a fundamental belief that banks and conventional lending institutions just do not like real estate investors. They don't, I owned a mortgage company for 8 years where I worked exclusively with real estate investors. So if there was a conventional loan program for real estate investors, I knew about it and I was, studying it and trying to make it work for my real estate investors. It's too hard. Here's the thing that banks like, conventional banks like the Bank of America's and the Wells Fargo's that you just talked about, the thing that they like is uniformity. They like everything to be the same. When I was learning the mortgage business before I opened up my own mortgage company, I worked for Pulte Mortgage, which is the mortgage arm of Pulte Homes, the home builder. And I worked in the department secondary marketing, and it was our job to pool millions of dollars worth of mortgages, package them up, securitize them, and sell them off to the highest bidder on Wall Street, right? And so the only way that you could package these things and pool them and sell them off to a bidder is if everything in that package was underwritten to, a certain standard. And so that's where we have Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, their underwriting guidelines. Now, like Bank of America underwrites to Fannie Mae guidelines, Wells Fargo underwrites to Freddie Mac. But the bottom line is that they all have to follow the same rules. So you're not going to be able to, have any type of there's no way that you can get around some of these underwriting rules. They're not going to allow it. If you are a self-employed person and you're a W-2 employee, a self-employed person and you're not paying yourself a salary and showing a W-2 at the end of the year, forget about getting any kind of investor financing from these institutions. They've also limited the number of properties that we can have financed in our name to 10. Right? Which is ridiculous. So in your example, you're like, look, I know how to find really great properties. My problem is funding them. When I find really great deals, I want to buy 10 or 20 at a clip. Well, good luck getting that done with your local Bank of America or Wells Fargo, because the rules that they have to follow in order to sell these loans off to the secondary markets will not allow them to do those deals. Just won't. So unless you are, a real estate investor who only wants to have 10 finance deals with conventional financing, and you have 30% to put down every time, and you have a W-2 and you can qualify with your taxes and you've got lots of cash reserves and yada, 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 every other rule that they have, then forget about it. That's not for you. There's no way you can get it done.
Sucks.
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's no way to scale or grow your company utilizing conventional financing. It is impossible to do.
And it's so amazing too, because as investors, typically they're going to be, hopefully smart investors are going to be buying in certain neighborhoods where they know they're going to be bringing value to this neighborhood because they're buying low. They're rehabbing a property. They're providing value for that neighborhood. And chances are they've done their homework. So they're buying with a nice bit of equity in the property as well. And like for some reason, and then they're going to put a renter in that property who's now going to pay for the loan they're going to have on the property, and yet they have a problem with that. It's like, these are the same institutions, of course, who are doing like no income and no job loans to people who are from Honduras. You could pop up here and get a mortgage.
Hey, when I was writing loans back in the day, we were calling them pulse loans. If you had a pulse, congratulations, you're approved. That was basically how it went. But, the bottom line is that there are, you mentioned the community aspect of it. You're not going to be able to convince, your local Bank of America branch at the grocery store down the street that you're trying to improve your community and that's why they should get on board as part of this mission. It's just never going to happen. But, kind of in tandem with the private money strategy that I teach and that I love so much, there's also kind of a tandem strategy with another type of lender, institutional lender, and that's what I refer to as a portfolio lender. So it's a local bank or credit union, they're not like these big national banks, or, even multinational banks. These are like the local, Suncoast Bank of the West, or, those random little one-off banks that you see when you're driving down the street.
Right.
These lenders, for the most part, I'm going to say like probably 85% of them, we call them portfolio lenders because they set their own underwriting rules, because they don't sell their loans off into the secondary market. They keep them and service them in-house. So they have credit committees that will allow, right, somebody to look with some intelligence and common sense at a loan package from an investor and say, oh, cool, this makes a lot of sense to us, even though it wouldn't ordinarily meet conventional loan guidelines through Fannie or Freddie. We're totally going to do it because A, we believe in you and your business model, and B, we're all about improving our community. That's why we're a community bank or a community credit union, and that's part of their mission.
That's powerful. And it kind of, it's also powerful, your idea of, getting to that $1 billion threshold, because what you're doing, whether it's commercial or residential, and your students who are going out there and they're helping to improve these communities. They're revitalizing neighborhoods, putting, taking dilapidated buildings and houses and turning them in what was once an eyesore, into the place that you didn't want to see anymore, cutting back trees and making this house beautiful again. So that's a really powerful thing to give back to this community.
It really is. Let me tell you a quick story. Just actually happened a few days ago, and it's still really, it's really impactful to me, and I think it'll be impactful to your listeners as well with regard to this whole topic. One of my coaching students, his name is Steve Driscoll, and he's in New York City, and he is buying low-cost properties in Alabama, and he's acquiring them with private money, and he's keeping that private money in those deals long term, and then he's wrapping those mortgages and reselling them using seller financing. And so he's, setting his own underwriting rules and has his own loan program and, selling his houses. And he sent me a photograph of this couple that had purchased one of his houses, utilizing his seller financing offer. And he said it was the cutest thing. The couple rolled up to the house for closing. After they signed the papers, they went to the car and they took out a card table and a couple of chairs. They had a bottle of champagne and a couple of little plastic champagne glasses, and they popped the bubbly. This man, 74 years old, his 68-year-old wife, they'd never owned a home before. This was the very first home that they were able to own.
Wow.
And they were sitting in the driveway at their card table of their home, drinking champagne and toasting their legacy and how happy they are and the fact that they're going to be able to have something to leave to their children when they go. It's powerful stuff that investors are doing all over this country.
That's powerful. That's the power of private money. That's amazing. That is amazing. I love that story. And that brings me, because that was really, it's a great segue into this question about creativity. With you talk about this gentleman, Steve Driscoll in New York City, and what he was able to do with creativity in these deals. Like, it's not just, hey, Susan, ring, ring, I'd like to borrow some money. Here's the house I'm going to buy. I need $200,000 and I want to buy these 6 houses. That's it, cut and dry. He's taking these houses, he's wrapping them in mortgages and then selling them to maybe folks who might not have ever been able to qualify for a mortgage before. And now they're able to move into a home. How important is creativity in sort of creating your deals?
Oh, I think it's huge. It's absolutely huge. You can't be an entrepreneur of any caliber without a certain degree of creativity. Seriously. And in getting real estate deals done, I think real estate investor really is just code for problem solver. And in order to solve the majority of the problems that we encounter, both on the buy side and the sell side, you have to be a creative investor.
That's amazing. I love that story. How can you build some wiggle room in your deals? Like if your deals take an unexpected turn, can you do that in private money?
You can. And so here, there are a couple of kind of things that are inherently built in, and then there are some other things that you can do as well. First, we're talking about real estate. So when I first started out and I was raising private capital, I thought, okay, who do I know with money? Well, I thought at the time the only person that I knew who had any substantial amount of money was my Uncle Bill, right? He was the very first entrepreneur and self-made millionaire in our family. And I was, he's my honorary dad. We're very close. And I reached out to him and invited him to participate in my deal. And he said, I have the majority of my money tied up in the stock market right now. I really like my 8% return on my preferred stocks. And I'm not really into moving it yet, but if something happens, then, get back with me and we'll talk. So, 2000 happened. That was the first disruption in his little preferred stock. And his, there were several of his stocks that, forget about returning the 8% return, they pretty much went to zero, right? So he was getting a 0% return.
Right.
He built some of it back, and then it happened again to him in 2008. And I was like, Uncle Bill, so what do you think now? Stocks versus real estate. He's like, you know what, kid? Hindsight is 2020. If I would have known now or known then what I know now, I would have definitely taken that money out of the preferred stocks, invested it with you in the properties. Because unlike stocks, right, and derivatives and all that other stuff that people are investing in, real estate never goes to zero. Right? I have yet to invest in or hear of a piece of real estate whose value goes to zero.
Right.
There's always going to be some residual cash value, some salvageable value that you're going to be able to get out of it. Heck, even if the place burns down, you're still going to get an insurance check, right, for the replacement value of the home. And so that's kind of the inherent risk mitigator in real estate versus any other investment vehicle that's out there that potentially could go to zero.
I love that.
I really rely on that. It's like, look, if I'm buying a property utilizing private money and I'm buying it for, 60 to 70% of the future value, then I already have like 30 to 40% wiggle room anyway. But that on top of the fact that even if, everything goes to hell in a handbasket and it loses a majority of its value, I can either hold that and continue to make those debt payments to my to my underlying investor until the value comes back, or I can sell it and take the proceeds and make my investor pretty close to whole again, if not completely whole.
Right. And we've had Robert Sheeman on the show, and a friend of mine, and he, 500 doors. He's like, look, I own many properties in Las Vegas during the crash. And you know what? Yeah, they lost value, but he goes, I didn't care because I didn't lose one penny of my rental income. During that time, they stayed consistently rented. Yeah, the values went down, but that's okay because I wasn't selling them. So, and he buys everything with private money, and he's still able to make his debt payments and do what he needed to do on those. But even at a massive crash like that, people are still seeing the same in their rental income.
Yeah. Yeah. We've, it's rare, so rare that, someone is unable to return the investment, or at least, the interest back to a debt partner or even an equity partner in a real estate deal.
Speaking of that, and as we move towards the end here, why is it so important to be impeccable with your word? You talk about that in the course as well. When it comes to real estate investing, say what you do and do what you say. Right.
Look, we have a fiduciary responsibility to people. people are trusting us with their retirement money. People are trusting us with their savings. And that's something that I take very, very seriously. I am all about, as you know, right? Because you've read my book, authenticity, transparency. I strive every day to be impeccable with my word. If I tell you I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And if I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to say I'm going to do it. That's what people expect from us. And I usually put it in the context of like tiny lies or like tiny betrayals. So here's an example. If I expect to have a lasting relationship with a private money partner, and I do, by the way, I'm not what I call a hit and run investor, right? These are relationships that I'm establishing that I want to have for the long term. I don't want you to just invest in one deal with me. I want you to be with me for years and years and come with me into every deal that I go into, right? I still have my, the private money partners that I started off with when I first started raising private capital back in 2004, like all of those guys and a few women are still with me, right? Because I have done what I said I was going to do, right? Through all the ups and the downs that we've been through, all the deals that we've been in over all the years, I know for a fact that our relationship is so strong that I could pick up the phone at any time and say, hey, here's what we're doing now. I need you to wire X amount of dollars to this account into escrow by this time on Friday. Are you in or are you out? And they're like, I'm in, I'm wiring it. Awesome. That's the power of relationships. And those relationships are built on the back of being impeccable with your word. The tiny lies and the tiny betrayals that I talk about is, if I say that I'm going to meet you at 1:00 and I show up at 1:15, I've basically lied to you, right? I didn't show up when I said I was going to show up. Now, if I keep doing those things over and over and over, then that's going to erode the trust that you have in me, and it's going to erode our relationship. And when I pick up the phone to say, hey, this is where I need your money to be on Friday, you're going to start to think, oh, gee, do I really want to come in this deal when she's, built up these tiny lies and tiny betrayals over time? Don't be that person. Be the person that takes care of your relationships and does what you say you're going to do and is completely authentic and transparent. And, that's the way that you're going to be able to not have to go out and start from scratch in raising private capital for every deal that you do. This is the way that you just have a spreadsheet or a list of people that you can count on year after year to come into every deal and support every investment that you do.
And while I got those negative associations with money about borrowing from my dad, I did get always be on time. And so I've always suffered from that. I'm always like 10 minutes early for everything because of my dad. And if you say you're going to do something, do it. Stand by your word.
Just do it. How hard is that?
Yeah.
It's not, just come on. I mean, don't, it's all mindset. Don't screw yourself, and right. I know that people have said, well, gee, I think it's a bit of self-sabotage, right? Maybe I didn't want the investment or I didn't want the investor. It's like, oh, come on, know what you want, be firm in that, stand firm in that, and act accordingly.
As we wrap things up, I would love to give our audience a concrete example for them to wrap their heads around, because some of this can get a little esoteric, but I want them to, let's role play for a minute. Let's say I want to buy 5 properties, right? The single family homes that I want to buy, I say just for round numbers, $40,000, but they're worth $50,000 or $55,000. They're going to cash flow like $700 a month. I know exactly where I'm buying them. I know exactly what zip codes I buy them in. What's the best way for me as a guy who maybe has $0 to go out and say, I would like to buy these 5 properties? What's the best way to structure that? Just a general, if you had to pull one great example out of your hat and bag of tricks, because you've got all kinds of creative ways to create deals. What's a simple one-step strategy or a few-step strategy that the first person could do to really take action on that? I want to buy 5 properties, cash flow $700 a month. They're worth 50 to 55, and I'm buying them for 35 to 40. How would I put that together? That would make sense for everyone, a win-win for everyone.
Yeah. So there's lots of ways that you could put it together. Obviously, the most simple way, right, is if you wanted to do what we call a one-to-one investment, it just becomes a very simple trust deed investment. So on each house, you get one individual private money partner to pony up the 100% of the cost. Usually that's the purchase price of the home, all the closing costs, and any anticipated repair budget that you need for that property as well. In exchange for that one investment, they get the promissory note and also a deed of trust. If you wanted to structure it more like raise the capital and pool that money, right, from a couple of investors on all 5 houses, then you could put it together in a simple entity. Like we use LLCs. The LLC could be the entity that owns those properties, and your investors actually buy units in that LLC, which is that ownership entity. And then they each get secured with their own promissory note for the amount that they invest. But those would be the 2 simplest ways to get that kind of a deal done.
And those are great. And the one thing that's sort of sticking out that is the interest rate. That's the thing I think that trips up a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I know that can be the sticking point. What would you advise people? I know in your course you say, you can get it really low, but if someone's just starting out, should they expect to get a low interest rate in that kind of a structure? What should they ask for, and how many years should they structure it?
Here's the thing. You need to figure out what you need your private money program to be about. So if your strategy is to acquire single family homes, hold them in your portfolio long term, and say that the minimum amount of time that you need to utilize that money is 5 years, then that's what you need to be pitching, right? If you're just going to be utilizing capital for, one or two rehabs where it's going to be short-term flips, then, it's going to be a completely different pitch to a different type of investor who just wants their money working for a short time. Maybe they, have liquidity issues or whatever. So the first step is just figure out what you need, and what you want. In terms of the interest rate, here's the thing. Back in the day when I first started doing this, and I learned how to do this from a hard money lender, by the way. So I was borrowing hard money from this hard money lender, and all a hard money lender does is go out and raise private capital and then mark it up and broker it out to borrowers. So, for example, the hard money lender that I was using, Ed, he was raising capital at like 6 or 7% and had some of his own money in there. And he was turning around and loaning it to me for 4 points and 15% interest for these short-term rehab loans. And I was paying it, right? Because I could. So I just thought, okay, Ed taught me how to raise private capital, and so I'm going to cut out the middleman. And I thought, hey, I'm going to pay my investment partners 15%. Which was ridiculous, right? People were looking at me like I was Bernie Madoff. Like, you've got to be kidding me. There's no way you can pay 15% on this money. Get out of here. So I realized very quickly that, just like you can shoot yourself in the foot by offering to pay too low of an interest rate, you can shoot yourself in the foot by offering to pay too high of an interest rate, because people just, it's that fight or flight thing, right? It's like they just know something's up. Like, that sounds like a scam to me. So here's the thing that we do, the thing that I teach my students to do. And through the course of chatting with your prospect, right, the person that you're encouraging to invest in your deal, I just ask them the question, the money that you're thinking of investing with me, what is it currently earning? And you're going to hear all sorts of answers. You'll hear, from like my Uncle Bill, initially his was 8% and then it was like 0. I've heard negative. I looked at my niece's, portfolio statement for her trust fund a couple of weekends ago, and she was earning cumulatively like 3.3% return on her portfolio. So you're going to hear a lot of, low returns, and you might hear some mediocre and maybe even some high returns too. But if it's low enough, if somebody is like 1 or 2% or even less than that, if they're pulling funds from like a CD or, some low interest bearing whatever, then we follow up with what I call the magic question. And we just say, well, all right, what if we could double that? Right. So if my niece, for example, if she's making a 3.3% return on her portfolio, and I say, well, honey, what if we could double that return for you? Well, now she's making a 6.6% return, which is double what she was making on her investment initially, but I'm thrilled to get private capital at 6.6% if that works in, whatever structure I need it to work in for the investment. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So I'm like, instead of going into it saying, here's what I'm going to pay, have an idea in your mind of what your investment can afford to pay. But just ask the question, what are you currently making on this money? And if I can make it better, we can make that a win-win.
I love that. Wow, powerful stuff. And I can't thank you enough for joining us on the show today. Susan, where can people, I have links in the show notes page of morrisinvest.com/podcast. We're going to have links to Susan's course in there, Getting the Money, plus links to her great book as well. Where can people learn more about everything you're currently working on in the mission to $1 billion?
Sure. You can head over to my main company website and my blog, and that's over at theinvestorinsights.com.
Wonderful. Any sort of parting words of wisdom for people who are thinking about taking action on private money, or this is the thing that's holding them back?
Do it.
Do it.
Do it. And the sooner the better. The more time you waste thinking about it and putting it off, then the less time you have to make this happen for yourself. So just do it.
Wonderful. My guest has been Susan Lassiter-Lyons, investor, entrepreneur, author, and coach. And you can check out everything we talked about on today's show. Susan, it's been my great pleasure to have you here on the show.
Thank you, Clayton. It's been my pleasure as well.
And thank you all for downloading and subscribing to this podcast. We hope that we bring you as much value as possible every week. We publish 3 times a week, and the response has been overwhelming. Thank you for all of your kind feedback. And it is our mission to help you create passive income and legacy wealth for you and your family. So any questions you have, you can always shoot them over to us on our podcast page on the morrisinvest.com/podcast. Just shoot us some responses, and we'd love to follow up with you. We'll see you back here next week, everyone, with another episode. Have a great one. Much love to you.